Okay. So the reason why my face isn't in the image is because I'd like for most of this art project to be represented with that mask right there, which I have created through a process of 3D scanning my face and then 3D modeling the mask to fit my exact face, and then I printed that out, and I would otherwise have the mask on right now if it was able to fit to my face. We're still working on prototype, and that would be the way that I'd like to represent myself as an artist. So this is all really new to me. I was a musician for most of my adult life, and that took up most of my time. And of course I did art during that period, comics and graphic design and mostly digital mediums, a little bit of painting. And at some point I would say that I failed as a musician, in the greatest sense of the word. But I still make music, and it's like my deeper passion, and I'd like to think that I'm really good at it. It's just that it's a hard grind, and there's a lot of it's a lot of thankless work. And so I was living in Edmonton, and somebody said, "Hey, why don't you come out to Victoria and study comics?" And so I decided to do that. And so I abandoned everything I was doing there and sold all my music equipment and came to Victoria to study comics. And that was a good time. For about a year that happened, and then I met someone that I enjoyed making art with, and we decided to make a lot. And I started with painting. I started with abstract painting. There were some paintings that I made in the past, but this is new. When I was in Edmonton, I actually met somebody he was heavily inspired by Gerhard Richter, and it was the first time that I had ever seen anybody put so much paint on a painting before. He would take buckets of paint and do one smear, one brush stroke, if you will, one stroke with an entire bucket of paint, and I had never seen anything like that in my whole life. And for a long time, I had done a painting, and I would paint on many, many layers, and I would shape it. And this is still something that I do. Shape it so that it is a sculpture. Instead of allowing the brush strokes to manipulate the texture of the painting, I would paint it so that the brushstrokes were part of the composition. And when I saw this guy using that much paint, I kind of lost my mind a little bit about it, because I had no idea that people did that, and I'd never seen anybody do that in my life. So I started learning from him. He was a friend of mine, and as well, like an artistic mentor, I'd say. And I took a lot of those ideas and started doing those with this person that I met. And I made a few paintings, and I immediately went out. Like many people, they think that it's really difficult to go out and get your art into shows and things like that. But in many cases, people just want to be bugged. And so they were like, "Oh, there's this venue that wants art, and they're a new place in town, and so they're like, yeah, I want to try and get my art up in there. And I said, well, why don't you just go in there right now? We were standing next to it. And they're like, no, I'll go in some other time. I'm like, I'm just going to go in right now. I'm going to grab a business card. And I grabbed a business card. And, I went in there, asked them about it. The owner wasn't there, so I grabbed a business card. 5 minutes later, I'm on the phone, and I'm like, this is how you get it done. You apply yourself. And so then I sent them my art, and they accepted it and put it up in there. And so it was the first time, but then I got really sick. Anyway, fast forward a couple of years. So this stuff in particular is a lot different than what I had been doing painting. And so the things that I paint, I'm working on a series of high contrast images that are based on my family history. And that's going to be a long process. And so I also do abstract, and the abstracts are heavy texture, lots of paint, and I've sort of come across a nice format, I would say, the process for creating abstracts that I really like. And they're mixed media. Throwing lots of different things into the paint, like copper wire, and I have one that has a pack of cigarettes that I shredded up and put into there. Just things that can be like small and mashed into the paint. But then I needed to do something that wouldn't take very long, something that didn't take a lot of my time, that I could accomplish quickly, that I could do every day if I wanted to. And I was dabbling in graphic design because Dallas Segno is a character that comes with an entire universe that includes music that I write, and art, and video games, and comics, art, video games, hang on a second, music, and film, right. And the other character, well, there are many other characters as well, one of which is featured in some of this art. It was something that I wanted to involve because the abstracts don't have any figures in them, and because the high contrast art doesn't have Dallas in them, they needed to incorporate these different things. So I was online, and I had discovered an artist called Lauren Brevner, who uses this washi paper, and I liked that she did illustrative work with the washi paper, so I was looking for an excuse to use the paper for a while, Chiyogami paper. And so I started to collect digital images of the paper, and I started to do that by going down to the store and buying just like 8.5 by 11 pieces of Chiyogami paper, and took them home and would scan them into the computer. And originally I was intending on making sort of Mike Cran inspired optical art, using the character. And op art is, it's not easy to make look really good, and I find that I'm actually just not educated on the subject enough to do something that would be in line with like high quality op art. And so I didn't really think that was the way to go, and I had encouragement to do the op art stuff. But then, because I was already working in the digital medium, I realized that I could just take the character and swap out pieces of the imagery with the paper. And so I started doing that digitally, and as I was working on it, I would nest all of the paper with the potential cuts that I was going to make. Because I had already been doing high contrast black and whites, I was already familiar with the idea of taking photos and manipulating them into a digital format, enhancing them basically. And because I'm a big fan of using technology as a tool, that was especially inspiring when I discovered that I could slip the paper into these shapes. And so, I was like, technology to me is one of the most important vehicles for art that people don't appreciate many times until after it's already well into the mainstream. Like acrylic paint, for example, was around a lot longer than people were interested in buying acrylic paintings. And then certain people ended up making it more famous than others, right? And like Lichtenstein, I guess, he made acrylic paintings really popular. And I've been denounced for using acrylic paint, for example. Oh, they're not going to put your acrylic painting into a gallery or whatever. And I don't know if that's true at all. I've seen acrylic paintings in galleries, but I've been especially stressed to use oil, which I haven't even gotten into yet. We'll see how that goes. But then there's also Jeff Koons, who uses the assembly line as a way to create art. People criticize him, even though an assembly line is used to create your tools that you use to paint or do whatever it is, like sculpture work. It's not like people are going out and mixing up all their own paint. I mean, some people are. And then, bottling it, and then, getting all your brushes made. People are typically going down to the store, buying garbage, making their trash, and then putting it out there. And it's the same thing. And so paying 100 people to paint your painting, it's the same if that's your composition. And that's the way that he justifies it, which makes sense to me. So in this case, I wanted to do the highest quality work in the shortest period of time. I'm very heavily influenced by, my work is heavily influenced by, or what am I trying to say? I'm trying to evoke a specific emotion. The emotion that I'm trying to evoke is desire. The lighting isn't the best in here, but all of these images have gold and silver iridescent in the ink that's used in the paper. And so with the proper light, you get they shine like crazy. And it's unfortunate that the room doesn't totally help that expression. But that's why I also picked all of these frames that I have. And that's why they're in frames to begin with. So, as I was nesting all of these different pieces of paper, it basically went from, I had to use all of the paper. I had to make sure that I was making something that was as high quality as it possibly could with the least amount of cost, and especially cost of time, because time is the most valuable thing on earth, right? That you have as a living being. And so as I was composing these images, I was also nesting and making sure that I used the maximum amount of the paper as I was going along. And so all of these are numbered. They're in the first series of 45, and they're numbered on the back as well. And as you go along the numbers, you'll find that the paper gets more scarce. And so the limitations start to be visible in the process. After creating all of the nests, I went to an engineer who owns a laser cutter, and I had him take my nests and cut them out of paper. It was a long and expensive process. The process didn't take me physically as long to execute as it cost me in dollars. And so the frames, everything, it's all an expression of my personal investment in capitalism. When I grew up, I was in my teen years, I listened to punk rock. It destroyed my brain. I became a nihilist. I was very politically motivated, and I was also basically, how do I say it? I was depressed all the time. I believed that everybody and everything and to do with money and everybody's thoughts about spending and how the world operated was negative, bad, wrong, and destructive. And it basically almost killed me. Just believing that almost killed me. I became sick in the worst possible way, and about a year ago, I almost died. And when I decided to change my life and change my outlook on life, what I realized is it's just the way that things are. And money is just a form of energy that helps people get things. And it sucks that the world lies, but that's just the way that things work. And so I wanted to express my almost apology to capitalism, because it's actually not as bad as you think. I grew up in Canada and in Jamaica, and Jamaica's as close to anarchy as I think that it gets. The people down there they do not like government, they do not like doctors, they do not like police, lawyers, they don't like bureaucracy. People can't even get cell phone contracts in that country because nobody is accountable. So everything's pay as you go. Everything is ownership. Everything is primarily based on ownership and very minimal allowances for loans. And it's incredible because it's built into the culture. The result of anarchy ends up being capitalism. You can meet a man who is a dentist, primarily that's his job, and then his secondary form of income is rentals. And he'll have a stack of chairs. I drove through the countryside 10 miles to go and get chairs for a rental for our party that we were throwing. And this man had a stack of chairs in his front yard. And I was like, who is this person that we're renting this from? And they're like, oh, some dentist. And he didn't just have a stack of chairs in his yard. He had a stack of chairs in his backyard. He had stacks of chairs in a shed that he had. That was his side gig, because people just gonna do what they do, you know. And when you, it was just one of these beautiful eye-opening experiences that's part of me, you know. And when I talked to my mother about her grandparents, yeah, she says one was a communist and the other was a capitalist, and they were like this their whole marriage, but it managed to work. But all of that is in me, and so it's just impossible for me to deny that. Okay, so I have these sympathies that I have to reconcile with about how the world works, but at the same time there is good that comes from the things that you might think are the worst possible things in the world. And so all of that has led to me creating this. I'm a big fan of spending a lot of money on art. That's what I like to do. And so I like to spend a lot of money on making music. I like to spend a lot of money on creating my vision. And I'm not scared to do that. And that's why when I saw the guy throw heaps and heaps of paint on his painting, it blew my mind, because I realized that I could be doing that. I could be spending all my money on paint. Or, in this case, laser cutting. And so we worked on the process, though. I think that it'll cost a lot less the second time, which means that I can get a lot more work done with a lot less money. And that's the idea. Get as many of these cranked out in this year as possible. That's the first plan. And then there's accompanying music, and we're working on stories, and I think that's it. Yeah, Jeff Koons was the one who really got me into thinking about spending the money, though. I just kind of saw him and how trashy his art is, and I was thinking about what kind of balls you have to do shitty line work and blurred out images, and then pay hundreds of people to paint those trashy things for you. I mean, he does some nicer stuff, but the trashy stuff is the really funny stuff, you know. And you gotta have a sense of humor about art, because it's not really that big a deal.